I learnt to knit 1 full year ago, and during that time, I've bought a lot of yarn. So I've crunched the numbers to find out exactly how much I bought, what it cost, what it's made of, and more importantly, discovered just how out of control my yarn stash really is. I brought some yarn into the year with me from when I was a kid and I used to crochet. It was mostly just a few small balls of cotton and acrylic, and they lived in a wicker basket in the corner of my bedroom, barely touched. Early on last year, as I picked up knitting, I started to go on Facebook Marketplace and to local op shops to scour for deals. Initially, it was just for my first project, and then just for the next few projects, and then for some future projects. And before I knew it, I was buying yarn for no reason at all. I was buying all the time, from across the country to the smallest local garage sales, and I felt pressured to pick up anything half decent that I found because I never knew if I was going to be able to find it again. Luckily, buying secondhand is pretty cheap, but what you save in money, you make up for in time. You can spend hours wading through junk, cheap, scratchy acrylic, old moth-eaten yarn pulled out of the back of someone's grandma's closet, and scraps that aren't enough to do anything useful with. I probably spent a couple of hours a week researching, scrolling, and shopping for yarn. For the most part, this buying frenzy eased off throughout the year, and I felt like I was getting through it at a reasonable pace, right? Well, in total, in my first year of knitting, I used 4,438 meters, which is 2,091 grams, or 23 skeins across 14 projects. I've documented that all in another video. That sounds like a lot, and it's not the only yarn that left my stash during the year. I gave away one lot of yarn to my mum as a gift. I sold a few lots that I'd picked up on a whim and then decided they just weren't right. They weren't the color I thought they weren't the fiber I wanted. And I actually broke even on most of the things that I resold. And I donated quite a lot. And at some points, as the stash grew, honestly, I just needed to make more room. Looking into the data more later, I found out there was actually an interesting pattern behind the kinds of yarn that I got rid of, and I'll tell you that in just a minute. Finally, I threw some away. Unfortunately, I did not make it through the year unscathed from insects. One time, I reached into that basket of yarn and pulled out some cotton, and on it was a few fuzzy caterpillars, which I quickly learned were carpet beetles. I discovered they were all through the basket and all through my bedroom. So unfortunately, everything in there had to be thrown away, and I also bought a chest freezer and put in all my other yarn just in case. Another time, on receiving a package of purple mohair I'd bought on eBay, I found it was full of moth eggs and pretty much completely destroyed, so that had to be thrown away. As a preventative, I now keep all of my yarn inside Ziploc bags in plastic tubs, and any new yarn that I buy gets a week in the chest freezer before joining the rest. So considering how much I got rid of and used, just how big did my yarn stash really get? I mean, I know that I bought more yarn than I used just by looking at it, but I can't tell exactly how much. This is my yarn collection. It fits into 4 50-litre tubs, and it honestly just sits under my desk and takes up space. So it's about time to take a deeper look at what's in these tubs. I document all of this yarn in Ravelry, meaning it was really quick to just export it all at once. So with about 2 days effort, I was able to churn through all the information. Here's what that looks like in cold, hard numbers. I started with a high-level summary of what I used up, what I bought but then got rid of, and what I still have in stash. I broke the data down into meters, grams, skeins, and dollars. And I've also done up a version where I've converted meters to yards and the Australian dollars to US dollars. From there, I was able to calculate out an average cost per unit of distance, grams, and skeins. In my stash, I have over 49 kilometers of yarn. To put that in perspective, that's further than a marathon, and it weighs over 16 kilos, which is more than the equivalent of 33 sweaters, or 169 socks, 4 babies, or 84 potatoes. But seeing it as numbers like this doesn't necessarily have the impact that I was looking for. I can see that I have far more than I used last year, but why? And what does that mean in real terms? So I made some charts to help illustrate what I'm working with. Here is most of that same information presented visually. The solid bars represent grams and the striped bars represent meters or yards. The interesting thing you can see here is that the distance per gram for the yarns that I got rid of is a lot less than the yarns I used up or kept, which suggests that I sold or donated a lot of the heavier weight bulky yarns, and I used and kept the lighter weights. So I've been buying bulky yarns that I didn't end up using. But let's not stop there. There's way more interesting ways to break up the data, like by color, fiber, weights, when and where I bought it, and what these buying habits I've developed would really mean for me going into the future. What this next chart shows confirms what I already knew. Over 98% of the skeins I bought last year were secondhand, with only 9 skeins being bought new. I'm really happy to see that because it's made the cost of the hobby a lot more reasonable, it's more environmentally conscious, and it's forced me to get creative with my knitting and my designs. I've decided to use grams as the key metric from here on out just to keep things simple. It's my preferred way to measure yarn, and it's more commonly used than meters and more consistent than skeins. Where necessary, I'll show you the difference compared to the other metrics. First, I broke up my purchases by month. You'll notice that the data actually spans over just more than a year. I started knitting and buying at the end of December and I didn't want to lose that information. As expected, my purchasing rate when I first started knitting was through the roof. In the first 2 months, in fact, I bought more yarn than the rest of the year combined. After that, it levels out, and you can see I actually didn't buy any yarn at all in September and October. But stumbling on some hard to find yarn and a massive secondhand lot at the end of the year really brought those numbers back up. Summertime, which is December to February, is when most people are clearing out their houses, and since I buy secondhand, I found it's the best time to pick up yarn. In winter, more people are in the mood to knit, so the options are a bit slimmer. My overall spend on yarn throughout the year was $1,140. While that's not a crazy amount to spend on a hobby for a whole year, I think mostly due to the secondhand shopping, it doesn't include any other knitting expenses like tools or patterns, and knitting isn't my only hobby, so that spending is definitely not something that I want to keep up. Since my purchases waxed and waned throughout the year, I wondered if there were any other patterns to my spending. I almost didn't make this next graph because I didn't expect it to show anything interesting, but I'm really glad that I did. This is the grams of yarn that I purchased every day of the week. As you can see, Saturday far outweighed any other day, accounting for almost half of my total purchases. This makes sense when you consider that I work full time and I don't often go out shopping after work, but I wasn't aware of this until just now. It seems my Saturday habit of cruising op shops was a serious culprit for picking up unnecessary yarn. Now let's get into the fun stuff. Zooming in on what I've got left in my stash 1 year later. Frustratingly, I discovered partway through this analysis that not all of the data that you enter into Ravelry comes out when you export it. I was still able to see it through the advanced search function though, so I was able to get some rough numbers. For me, hand wash only trumps machine washable yarn in my collection at about 64% of the total. And no surprises, wool is the most common fiber type for me at 55%, then synthetics, probably nylon, at 20%, followed by alpaca, cashmere, silk, cotton, and other. If I break it down by whether I have enough of one yarn in a specific colour to knit an entire sweater, then only 25% of my stash is sweater quantities, and the rest is just smaller amounts. The pie chart I was most looking forward to seeing was the breakdown by colour. And though it's beautiful, it just isn't easy to get a sense of the comparisons when it's set up like this, so I reformatted it as a bar chart, organised in rainbow order. My biggest collection is undyed, followed closely by blue, which is my favourite colour, then grey and multicoloured are neck and neck. Blue, purple and the oranges are the least popular colours. Notably, I have no red purple in stash, and you might think that means that I don't like it, but actually I bought a lot of it and I've already knit it all up. Another way to cut it is by weight or thickness. Here are the standard yarn thicknesses in order from left to right, thinnest to thickest. DK weight is by far my largest collection, then fingering, and then the others are quite even. But this graph is actually a little misleading. The bulky yarns have far fewer meters per gram than the lighter ones. So in terms of knitting time, I could knock out a lot more bulky than I could, say, lace in the same amount of time. So I've also done a version of this chart using meters instead of grams. And here's what that looks like. This gives you a much better idea of how long it would take me to knit through the different yarn weights that I have. Suddenly, fingering weight takes up a much larger portion of my stash than even DK. Time to work on some socks. So I have a lot of yarn in a lot of different colours and weights, but how much really? If I didn't buy any more and I kept knitting at my current rate, how long would it take me to knit through it all? I think I used to vastly overestimate how quickly I would use yarn, and that allowed me to keep buying for far too long. So I calculated, based on how much knitting I got done last year, how many more years of knitting I would have left using only my stash. The values differ a little between meters and grams because what I knit with last year and what I have left are slightly different, but the message they send is the same. At best, it would take me 8 years to knit through what I have, and at worst, 11 years. This blew me away, and if you'd asked me, I would have said I had a couple of years worth. Like with anything that people start to hoard, there was a thought in the back of my head about how terrible it would be if I ran out of yarn and I couldn't get any more. But this shows just how ridiculous that is. I could stop buying right now and knit for the next 5 years, and I would still have several more years afterwards to build up a collection again. So I know I need to either significantly pick up the pace or otherwise sell or donate some yarn. I'm going to dive deeper into my plans to tackle my mountain of yarn another day, and it involves 3D printing. But just for fun, what would happen if I didn't stop buying yarn? If I stuck my fingers in my ears and kept it up at this rate, here's what that would look like. I'm 27, and the data tells us that my life expectancy is 81 years old, meaning I'd have just shy of 54 years left. Those 54 years are shown along the bottom of this chart. And along the left side is a representation of how much yarn I would amass in years worth of yarn if I kept buying and knitting at my current rate of meters per year. The coloured section shows my stash building up year over year. The red dotted line indicates the number of years I'd have left to use it all. Where the two lines cross is the point at which I'd have accumulated enough yarn to last me for the rest of my life, also referred to as stash accumulated beyond life expectancy. The way I'm going, that scary moment would be less than 4 years away. And if I didn't see the light then, if I kept buying, by the age of 81, I'd have amassed 616 years worth of yarn. That's enough to pass down to my descendants, from my daughter to my great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter, assuming she'd want 600-year-old yarn. In distance, that's 2,734 kilometres, which is 30% of the Earth's diameter. In weight, that's 930 kilos. To use our comparison from earlier, that's the equivalent of 1,840 sweaters, 233 babies, or 4,600 potatoes. It would take approximately 220 of these 50-litre tubs to fit it all, which would fill a bedroom floor to ceiling, wall to wall. At second-hand prices, it would amount to about $58,000, and at retail price closer to $230,000. Even if you're in a position where that's a reasonable amount of money to spend on a hobby across your lifetime, the opportunity cost of not putting that money into something that you'd actually use is astounding. If that was put into a savings account instead, it would grow to be hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. Now, those numbers are all a bit dramatic. It's not that serious, but they paint a clear picture of just how quickly things can get out of hand, even if you're not somebody who necessarily wants to build up a large collection of things. I'm not going to keep buying at this rate. Keeping yarn takes up space, both physical and mental, and honestly, it's just sad that it's sitting there and not being used. I don't want a room full of yarn. I don't even want these 4 bins full. So I think it's time to commit to a no-buy challenge and a stash down. I'll make a separate video chatting all about how I'm planning to approach tackling my yarn stash and my buying habits, and I'll keep you updated. So that just about sums up my breakdown of my yarn acquisition, usage, collection, and potential future hoard. I really love the yarns that I have, and I'm excited to use them and to wear them. And I'm glad I took the time to look deeper into the why and the what of my stash, and I hope you enjoyed it too. If there's any other way that you'd like to see my data broken down or sliced, let me know and I'll see what I can do. I'd also like to hear from you about what kind of yarn collection you have, how long it took you to collect, and how long you think it'll take you to use. And until then, happy knitting.